It's time to get nerdy, y'all.
A little bit of gaming history for you.
Something relevant in gaming and discuss our opinions on it.
Should we kick it out of here, or should we kick-start it?
This is the part where you, the listeners, try to stump the hosts.
I'm not a lawyer. I just play one on a podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's Tuesday, February 27th, 2024, and you know what that means. It's time to get nerdy, y'all. Welcome to episode number 298 of Two Nerds in a Pod, the nerdiest video game podcast in the galaxy. I am Lam, also known as Mr. Nice Guy, and I'm joined by my comrade in gaming commentary, the Miggity Mac, also known as Maction. Mac, what's new, man? How you been?
Man, I've been all right. Not too frightfully much is new, aside from a cool couple of fun things that happened over the weekend that I'm going to need to save until the end of the show. Teaser for later. But yeah, not too much aside from a lot of adulting things, Mr. Nice Guy. Some, car registration, some filing taxes, some, just normal stuff that it's nice to have off of the plate, but is beyond boring in a way that I feel like it would be an injustice to subject you to that kind of nonsense at this time.
No worries, man. Well, my weekend was really, really good.
Yeah?
Lots of fun activities with the family, and my brother was in town from Seattle.
Nice.
We hung out, we went to a nice dinner, had some steak, and just shared some funny stories and some laughs. So that was good. Took the kids ice skating on Saturday, and they had a little carnival at their school on Friday. Which I try to support those things, Mac, because it's a fundraiser, right? You're supporting the school, you're supporting education.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of mayhem.
Yeah.
Schools do their best. Elementary school age kids easily entertained. We buy all these tickets to play games. One of the games is using a Nerf gun to shoot cans down. And I'm like, we definitely could have done this at our house. But no, we had a good time, and supporting the school is always a good thing. And yeah, man, I mean, life is good. I did do some retro game shopping as I took my brother to the airport, and I think I'll save that to the end of the episode with what I've been watching and playing. Other than that, not a lot to share. That was a mouthful, though.
But a good set of weekend things. I mean, I'll tell you what, that's goals right there.
Yeah, weekend goals. I tell you what, buddy. Well, hey, man, I say we do what we do best. And we hop right up in that gaming news, man. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. Mr. Nice Guy, can you tell me what I've been missing out on?
So much. And as a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, this is episode 298 of Two Nerds in a Pod, nerdiest video game podcast in the galaxy. Mac, I don't know what you're talking about for legalese, but I've got a story about Nintendo that I am going to share that hopefully doesn't overlap with what you're
Please have at it. I don't think it will.
This is from IGN.com by Isaiah Colbert. Here is what he writes. Nintendo is suing Tropic Haze, the creators of the popular Nintendo Switch emulator Yuzu, alleging its tech was used to let over 1 million copies of The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom download illegally a week and a half before its official release. The suit, which was filed on February 26th in the United States District Court of Rhode Island, alleges that Tropic Haze is liable for unlawful distribution of pirated copies of Tears of the Kingdom before it released on the Switch on May 12, 2023. Quote, today Yuzu provides any internet user in the world with the means to unlawfully decrypt and play virtually any Nintendo Switch game, including Nintendo's current generation and most popular games, without ever paying a dime for a Nintendo console or for that game. And to be clear, there is no lawful way to use Yuzu to play Nintendo Switch games, including because it must decrypt the game's encryption, the suit reads. Nintendo's pursuing legal action, demanding the creators pay $150,000 in damages with respect to each copyrighted work. Mac, I want to hear your thoughts on this. I think that we have kind of come to an agreement that we are fans of emulation. We are fans of it in regard to game preservation. But in terms of an emulator allowing people to play a game that is new without paying a dime, and potentially ruining the story of a game before it comes out, do you take a different stance here, or do you still believe emulation should be protected?
Nope, still a big fan. I mean, this was, I will have to actually dig into the documents before I see if Nintendo has raised any argument that is different from what was raised back when the same things were being said about Bleem and Connectix with respect to the PlayStation 1 emulation. But yeah, I'm still very much on board with emulation, not only for its power to preserve video game history, like you said, but also to make it easier to experience the games you want to play where you want to play them.
Okay, but let's backtrack a little bit, because I actually don't approve of, and I won't say I don't approve of this type of emulation, because, you know, technically someone could dump a copy of their Nintendo Switch game and play it via emulation. You know, that's the argument of why it's legal. Here they're saying that there's no legal way to use Yuzu, which I don't think is true, and I need to dive deeper as well. My question is not, has your stance on emulation as a whole changed, but more in this instance where it's being used to emulate Tears of the Kingdom. Do you still approve, or do you take a different stance here? And maybe I will give you the backdrop that we've seen a lot of layoffs in the game industry this year. We'll talk about one of those next. And I actually believe that decrease in profits is a big part of why we see those layoffs. So 1 million copies of Tears of the Kingdom, in my mind, those being pirated hurts the industry.
I don't think I believe that is the case. With respect to the layoffs as a result of decreased profits, I think it's more a function of increased expenses. And I was reading an article, it was about some interviews with people at various video game companies who were saying that, you know, most of their problems are coming as a result of executives who are making decisions that are divorced from solid business making practices that were costing the companies lots of money without any, you know, untethered from reality. But, you know, I don't know where the real thing is. However, I think that Nintendo is talking a big game and saying a lot of things that I don't know if they're writing checks, their mouths writing checks that they can't cash. And we'll see. Who knows? Maybe during the course of discovery for such a thing, we would find out that I am completely wrong, and I'll be happy to take the L. But I don't know, as Nintendo has proved themselves to be honest narrators of facts when it comes to what is going on in the video game sphere, especially when they think that they can win in a legal setting.
I disagree. Like, to me, this is less about Nintendo and more about the fact that either 1 million copies of Tears of the Kingdom was pirated or it wasn't.
Okay.
You know, a week before release. And, you know, you think about all of the people who go into making a video game. There's really no voice actors here, or there's minimal voice acting, but there's artists, there's programmers, there's level design. You know, there's executives who are behind the scenes. There's all types of people who 1 million copies would have allowed them to potentially feed their families, because some of these people may have residual payments as part of their contract. I would agree with you that maybe, you know, CEOs could take a pay cut, or maybe they could make some decisions that would be more financially responsible. But I also think that allowing a game to be pirated before release on such a large scale does not help the gaming industry.
Okay.
This is not an unknown comedian or an unknown musician putting their work on the internet for free and hoping it goes viral and getting exposure as a result of it. This is one of the biggest gaming companies in the industry and one of the biggest franchises having their work stolen and it resulting in decreased profits. So I would agree to disagree with you on this.
Okay. Well, now, one other thing that is worth noting is that we have all the evidence to indicate that over the years that people who pirate video games actually buy more video games than then they're like, this is very much couched as a people are pirating video games and that's missing us out on money. We've seen the combination of, one, people who pirate video games tend to be those who purchase video games the most and put the most money into the video game companies.
Well, yeah, that's because they're gamers.
And number two, that the people who wind up pirating a video game and not buying the video game tend to be people who were never going to buy the video game in the first place. And conflating the lack of capturing a revenue and missing out on revenue while you can try and sub them in for one another, it doesn't neatly map. Now, Tears of the Kingdom, a big game, big player, obviously something that brought in a lot of money and sold a lot of copies. I don't know if they're going to give us the details. I mean, I suspect that the opposition, in this case, the defendants, because Nintendo is bringing the action, I imagine that the defendants would very much like to bring up, okay, Nintendo, you say there were 1 million piratings of this game made possible by the thing that we did. Number one, that's not necessarily on us, but if you say it is, what can you tell us about the information you know about these accounts or what have you, where those sales, can you show that led to decreased overall sales? And I mean, this is going to be an interesting back and forth if it goes anywhere and doesn't get bounced at some point or another. But Nintendo has deep pockets, and if they feel like this will benefit them, they'll absolutely throw money after money upon this thing. So I imagine we'll be talking about this a bunch. But I can't wait for Discovery because, I mean, I want to know. And if there were 1 million copies, but again, I have said that Nintendo tends to be a unreliable narrator when it comes to the way that things are, especially when talking about emulation. They are not to be trusted with what they say.
Yeah, 100%. And, to answer, I agree with them not being trusted, but I disagree with you about the emulation thing. We'll leave it at that. To answer one of the questions in the chat, someone asks, how can a Switch game be pirated? They are cartridge-based, so in theory, their games should be less open to piracy. Think about all of the cartridge-based games of the past that have been pirated. Additionally, a couple weeks ago, we talked about a new product called the MIG Switch, which is effectively a flash cart that allows you to play Switch games illegally, or rather flash them, and then put the cartridge in your Switch and play them that way. So there actually are a lot of ways to pirate Switch games. I do agree, definitely not as easy as pirating something that's digital or something that is CD-based, but Switch games are very, very open to piracy, even though they do have that unique identifier. That means if you go online and someone else goes online with that same identifier, you could get banned. So it's a deep issue.
Just before we bounce away from this one, I do want to ask, is it Yuzu's responsibility to make sure... and I will just say, if the problem is that Nintendo's attempts at decryption weren't sufficient to protect their intellectual property, is it Yuzu's responsibility to shore up their defenses?
It's not, but the thing that makes this case unique is that they are claiming that there is no legal way to use Yuzu. So whereas with other emulators, you could argue, hey, I'm using a backup copy on this emulator, they're claiming that with Yuzu, that argument does not stand, which is interesting to me, and I don't know if I agree with that, but I'm interested to see where we go.
It is interesting. Again, about unreliable narrators, they have said that same thing about all emulation, period, since the beginning of time, and they've been wrong many times about it, but I think we both are on the same page there.
It'll be interesting to see, because, and this is the last thing I have to say, and then if you have other stuff to say, please say it, but I know Valve a few weeks ago took down some Switch emulators that were available on Steam, and so that could be that they're scared of Nintendo. It could be that they see the ethical issue. There's a lot of reasons they may have done that. And so this issue to me is different than SNES 9X or any of the other emulators that are out there. You know, this one is getting more attention, even though I wouldn't necessarily say that the profits lost are more than what we've seen by all of these retro emulators that are out there, since many of those retro games are available digitally on the Nintendo storefront. So, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm sure that Steam took those bad boys down because Nintendo probably asked them very nicely with a strongly worded legal notice.
They could have been.
Could have.
Well, cool. Let's keep it moving. Next story comes from, not that one. I got to find the right one, Mac. So many news stories,
and it never
little
stops.
Time. It never stops. News is just always there. This was from GameSpot.com by Eddie Macick. Here's what he writes. Sony's PlayStation division is cutting jobs in the latest round of high-profile layoffs in the video game industry. By some estimations, 2024 has already seen more than 7,000 video game industry layoffs. Reporter Jason Schreier of Bloomberg was the first to reveal the cuts, which have subsequently been confirmed by Sony in a blog post. Related to these moves, PlayStation is proposing to close its London game studio, which was most recently responsible for developing PlayStation VR games. Cuts are also coming, and this is Big Mac, to Sony's other studios, including Firesprite, Insomniac Games, Naughty Dog, and Guerrilla. Just for context, this is me speaking off the cuff. Insomniac Games, maker of Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2, huge games. Naughty Dog, The Last of Us, Uncharted, and others. And Guerrilla Games, I believe, made the Horizon games, Horizon Zero West and Horizon Forbidden West. PlayStation technology, creative, and support teams are also being affected by these measures. It's also resulting in the cancellation of some games. I won't get too much into that, but I do want to read this quote, Mac. It says, "These are incredibly talented people who have been part of our success, and we are grateful for their contributions. However, the industry has changed immensely, and we need to future-ready ourselves to set the business up for what lies ahead," he added. I believe this is Jim Ryan making this quote, and he's also leaving in March. So anyway, he goes on to say, "We need to deliver on expectations from developers and gamers and continue to propel future technology in gaming, so we took a step back to ensure that we are set up to continue bringing the best gaming experiences to the community." Mac, thoughts about these? And I mean, you can use the context of the Nintendo Switch piracy. Future-proofing is what he says. What do you think about these?
Man, that sounds like a lot of corporate buzzwords, like promoting synergy to try and offload responsibility. I mean, look, I'm no industry insider. I don't know the 411 or exactly why things had to come. We know that basically there's only a couple of things that people look to as indicators of what is going on at a company or what is going on at a studio owned by a company. And that is whether or not they're getting the sales numbers that they want. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously, I know that the Spider-Man games have been very popular. And
they're very successful, yeah.
Yeah, very successful. And I don't know what other games they're hoping for these studios that they already own to have done, or whether they had lackluster sales. But it sounds to me like either A, the explanation that I have heard in the past of the expenditures outpacing the sales, in which case that should mean a change in expenses, but the easy thing to do is to just cut personnel and to ask people to do more with less, rather than to take more realistic looks at what needs to be done. Like, for example, it is insanely cheaper to do a thing called working from home. It is, in most situations when jobs can be performed remotely, it winds up being more effective. It winds up being easier on the people who are doing the work, as they don't spend as much time commuting, and they don't spend as much money, which they never get reimbursed for, commuting. So it's a win-win-win situation, and it decreases the amount of overhead from the company not having to maintain corporate offices in the same locations for those employees to commute towards. It's kind of a win all the way around. But I feel like it wasn't that long ago that we were getting a whole bunch of companies that were saying, and and these aren't exclusively video game companies. I'm sure that they were a part of it. But saying, hey, y'all have to come back to work and start commuting once again. And now we've got problems where the only solution is to fire people. I mean, I don't know the particular situation of these Sony studios, but I feel like there were probably other places to cut rather than cutting from the people who make the games and support the games. And don't forget that we all here in this place, we love video games. We see them as art. I feel like this is the type of thing where we've got video games that came out a couple years ago and will get cut support from much sooner in the line. They'll get cut support after 1 year, 2 years, instead of 5 years, 8 years, which I still have feelings about even that cutoff.
Sure.
But it will be so much easier for idiot hothead executives to just say, cut support for this game that is not actively selling tons of copies right now, in order for us to try and try and cut a little, just the hairiest fraction, and be like, oh, look, I increased things by 5%. Please give me an extra X amount of dollars bonus because I am a problem solver. Anyway, I have feelings. I feel like I have feelings.
Yeah, I agree with the work from home. I don't know that increased expenses as much as we think it did. The real estate, even during COVID, many of those companies were still paying for real estate. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the expenses that come from return to office are put on the employee, which I think is a whole nother discussion. I do agree with you that a lot of these jobs could be done remotely. And that over time, hey, you could future-proof your business by letting your people work at home and then not signing another lease. Mm-hmm. And companies just don't realize that, but that's not this type of pod. That's a whole nother thing. One thing I will point out that we didn't discuss previously on the pod is the Last of Us Online game that Naughty Dog was working on. A few months ago, it was announced that game was canceled and that they wanted to put the resources elsewhere. They wanted the team to be able to focus on other games. And additionally, it was hypothesized and maybe even stated outright that making a game that was going to be a games as service, that was going to need constant server support and constant updates and constant content, was going to be expensive, timely, etc., etc. So to me, that was a move to future-proof. Those are the types of things you can do rather than firing people to ensure that people keep their jobs. Now, I'm not happy that game got canceled. I wish that it was still going to be made. But firing 900 people and saying we're future-proofing the industry, I still think that that's attributable to profits. I think that profits being down, as someone said in the chat, Sony made projections that their PlayStation 5 sales are going from 25 million to 21 million in the last sales call, and the stock value declined by 10 billion. And so those type of projections hurt the industry and ultimately result in jobs being lost. I think that's a big part of the problem. Another comment that I want to read is, and I think this is actually very accurate, Galvatron says, Sony made 3 critical errors: the overpriced, badly planned PSVR 2, the overinflation of PS5 projections, and overpaying for Bungie. But the worker bees paid the price for these bad decisions of the overpaid execs. Not getting into the political commentary of execs and how much they make, but I do agree some bad decisions were made, and now people are paying the price. And that's what I would say.
I mean, I would need to know more, but those sound all like possibilities. These sound like things that I've heard about, that Mr. Nice Guy, you have shared here on the pod, about the PSVR 2 or the PS5 numbers and such. So, I mean, this all has a certain ring of potential accuracy, and it certainly sounds like a narrative that can fit the available facts. I don't know as we'll ever get our hands on the information to know what exactly the truth is. But, you know, I'm willing to believe such a narrative.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say, you know, just to kind of use an example, and then we'll wrap this segment. So I took my brother to the airport the other day, and I saw one of my favorite restaurants, Raising Cane's. Cane's makes delicious, fresh, never frozen chicken fingers. And if you've never tried Raising Cane's, you should give it a shot. Texas toast, chef's kiss. It's beautiful. I hadn't eaten there in a while, Mac, and I went to go order what I always order at Cane's, which is the Caniac. 6 chicken strips, fries, 2 Texas toasts, because I substitute the Texas toast for the coleslaw, because I don't like coleslaw. The price of this, Mac, was surprising to me, having not been there in a couple years. It was $16.99 for this fast food chicken. Mm-hmm. Now, after tax, it was 18-something. Mm-hmm. Prices have gone up on chicken. Prices have gone up on technology, on chips, on video games. And when I say chips, I mean chipsets. Mm-hmm. Everything is more expensive, some in part to inflation, some in part to COVID. Things have changed. And so future-proofing yourself is important, but there has to be a way to do it that isn't at the expense of these employees. That's what I had to say, and that has been our news for the week.
All right. Well, let's take a look perhaps back to some fonder times, Mr. Nice Guy, with some video game history.
Yeah.
A little something, several little somethings fun and interesting this past week. Because this week was a good week for video games, especially in or around the 2000 era. Starting back in 1999, Mr. Nice Guy, a little title for the PlayStation 1 that nobody's ever heard of, I'm sure, called Silent Hill.
Ah, classic.
Yeah. Is perhaps Silent Hill one of your games, Mr. Nice Guy?
It's a game that I've dabbled in, but it's not a game that I have a rich history with. But I'd be remiss if I didn't know about it, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's a great game.
It's definitely, if not us personal involvement, it's definitely in the video game zeitgeist. Now, you know me, Mr. Nice Guy. I've told you before about how Resident Evil 2 was incredibly difficult for me to get through because I am not a scary game person.
Yeah.
And while, of course, Silent Hill comes after the first Resident Evil, and while Resident Evil certainly was very early to the impact of the horror survival game, Silent Hill, though, actually had a rendered full 3D environment, whereas Resident Evil had these, static camera angles, pre-rendered backgrounds and everything, and only some of the stuff rendered, whereas Silent Hill, the whole thing. So that meant that they could switch perspectives. You could go into a different perspective in the game and then go back to fixed perspectives, and that would work within the game itself. Also, the limited render distance, using that to put in the fog that we now associate so solidly with the Silent Hill franchise. My gosh, even the crackling static on the radio to let you know that you've got enemies nearby. A lot of really cool things that came together very, very well in Silent Hill. A lot of which, were based on either the technology or the technology limitations of the time that came together to form a uniquely unsettling and spooky package of video gaming. Well, we'll leave that there for Silent Hill because that's what I've got to say about that. If we flash forward just a few years, a little title for the original Xbox called Jet Set Radio Future. Now, I have played a little bit of this, Mr. Nice Guy, and I know that we've answered a couple of video game trivia questions about it, and I don't believe that
Correct.
You've played Jet Set Radio Future.
I have not played Jet Set Radio. I love the graphical style.
It's fantastic. The scrappy gang of youths taking back the street from the corporate overlords. But it's especially fitting that we talk about it now, Mr. Nice Guy, because Jet Set Radio Future took place in the far distant future Tokyo of 2024. So, if you haven't played Jet Set Radio Future, just give it a play this year especially, so that you can appreciate just how much farther we need to go before we make it to Tokyoto of the video game. But all right. Mr. Nice Guy, 2 games that I know, or at least one game I know that you have some memories for. It was 2017 for the PC that we saw Hollow Knight.
Yeah, so I'll be brief here, but I would have to say I could talk about Hollow Knight all day. One of my favorite, actually, it is probably my favorite Metroidvania of all time.
It's right up there for me, too.
And it's got to be like my favorite indie as well.
Yeah.
So much lore, really, really tight controls, beautiful art style, and such a deep map. And it's one of those Metroidvanias where there's actually optional stuff to do in terms of beating certain bosses, in terms of going through certain round-based challenges, and so many different jewels and customization things that you can add to your arsenal to really play the game how you would want. And I'm referring to them as jewels. I think they're actually called something else. Charms, correct. Hollow Knight is the rare game that I actually want to play again, and it's on my Steam wish list, even though I have it on Switch, because I want to run through it again at some point.
Gotta pick that up for Steam so that you can play it on that Steam Deck.
That's right. And I can't wait for the second one to come out. It was announced several years ago, and we still haven't gotten Silksong yet. Been waiting on that forever. Come on, Team Cherry.
Maybe this month, Mr. Nice Guy. Maybe this month. Well, and then just last but most certainly not least, a quick hit, 2016 for the PC, Stardew Valley. A single dev working on that in his spare time. What a triumph of what just one person can do. But yeah, that's kind of the gaming landscape of this last year. Big items released in years before this week.
Well, Mac, it's time for the Indie Game of the Week.
Woohoo!
Where we talk about a game that may need more attention and let us know if it needs your attention. And Mac, we've decided, you and I, that rather than just telling the people if we recommend a game or not, we want to come up with a scale to let you know where the games stand. And we decided to go with a 5-point scale. To determine what we think of these games. Now, in my mind, Mac, a 3, if a game gets a 3, it's not a bad game.
No, of course not.
It's an okay game. It's a good game. Like, give it your time if it's your thing. I think 4s and 5s are games that really shine, and 1s and 2s are games that struggle for some reason. But, Mac, before we get to the number, this week's game is Sanabi. Here is the description. And here's what it says. It says, Sanabi is an exhilarating, stylish, dystopian action platformer. Play as a legendary retired veteran and use your signature prosthetic arm to jump over cliffs and skyscrapers, zip through bullets and traps, and defeat powerful enemies. Now, typically, we try to find games that are not getting much attention. This one's actually getting a lot. It was released November 8th, 2023. Currently has an overwhelmingly positive rating on Steam. With 19,824 reviews. Shout out to the developer Wonder Potion and the publisher NeoWiz for providing us these games for review. Mac, this game costs $14.99, but right now, as of this recording, is $11.99 on Steam. Mac, I am excited to hear what you thought about Sanabi.
Okay, I love grappling hooks. Love it, love it, love it, love it.
Do you really?
Oh, gosh, yes. Almost any game that involves a grappling hook, I love. It can be the case that grappling hooks aren't done especially well, in which case I'm just disappointed. But when a grappling hook is done well, I love it. There is this old Flash game called Give Up Robot. And it was the first game that I think I ever played where it involved a grappling hook, and I just fell in love. Anyway, haven't stopped loving grappling hooks. I quite enjoyed Sanabi because while it doesn't say grappling hook, it's a grappling hook.
It is a grappling hook.
You get a few other bells and whistles as you go. You can swing around. There's lots of tight platforming involved. Yeah, a side-scrolling action platformer with grappling hooks. What's not to love? I do have some things though that I thought held this back from being a perfect game. Should I say that now, Mr. Nice Guy, or do you want to get some observations?
Yeah, I'll dive in for a minute. So I am with you. I liked this game. I'm a sucker for games that are pixel graphics with tight controls. And, one of my favorite indies back in the day was Cave Story, and this gave me Cave Story vibes. Like, it's a step up in terms of graphical fidelity, but it's in that range.
Yeah.
One of the things that caught me off guard, I remember the first night we got these codes. And by the way, codes for free do not affect our opinions. But I started playing this game, and I was like, oh, this is very story-based. Mm-hmm. This is not just your typical, hey, here's your characters, go rescue the person. Mm-hmm. I was playing it at night, and I was kind of tired, and I thought, oh, I'll just play a few chapters, if it's chapter-based, and see what it's like. And I was falling asleep simply because there was so much reading involved, not because it wasn't engaging, but just because it was late at night. And that actually adds to the charm of the game to me. It's not often that we get character development, that we get backstory, that we get deep, immersive cutscenes that are text-based, character dialogue and whatnot, in an indie game like this. I think about some of the other indies that we've played, and they do have text, but the story is much more elementary. Mm-hmm. The writing here is really, really solid. And I will say about the gameplay, it was tight, but also allowed for creativity. If you want to try to play this super fast and get through each screen super fast, you can do that. If you want to play it slow and kind of just be methodical, you can do that too. Last thing, and then I want to hear what you didn't like. I found myself dying a lot more to environmental things than I did to enemies. And I always find it interesting when it's not like the enemies are overpowered. It's just my own mind figuring out how to get through the different screens in a game efficiently and safely. And I liked that about this game.
So while I actually did not appreciate the writing quite as much as you did, Mr. Nice Guy.
Okay.
I found that while they did try to give us a lot of story from the dialogue between the characters, I didn't really find that much landing for me. I kind of just wanted to skip along, but I didn't want to miss what was going on because
Right.
I was only going to get the story in these things. But I was like, just give me more gameplay. So yeah, I felt differently about the story, but hey, I'm glad you liked it. I will say one of the things that, aside from the dialogue, that kind of held me back was that there are one or two boss battles, one particularly that I'm thinking of that was especially a pain near the end, because there was kind of an RNG component to beating the boss. You had platforms that would get destroyed and then be replaced by return platforms. And then, of course, you would have the way that you damaged the boss and obtained victory was also kind of RNG based. And the combination of, you could be hung out to dry with the new, with the damaging component that you needed against the boss coming in on the far opposite side of the screen with no way to get there, and the boss barreling down on you. And so I feel like whenever you do a boss battle that relies heavily on RNG for either, the resources you need to do damage, you need to kind of nudge that RNG to be in the favor of the player.
Fair enough.
So that you wind up not getting that. Because, more so than anything else, that one boss battle accounted for the great majority of my deaths in the game. And it could have just been bad RNG on my part, but it was particularly frustrating. And that held this back just a little bit in my esteem.
One question for you.
Yeah.
So, one of the things we often talk about is value to price. We've had games that cost $20.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a 5-hour game, but we've said, you know what? There's a lot of love that went into this. They recorded their own rotoscoping. It's just, it's a great story. I'm thinking about a couple of games we played last year. How do you feel about the value to price on this game, given that we didn't pay for it, but a $14.99 price tag? What do you think?
Oh, fantastic! Yes. I mean, I don't want to give too much away, but yeah, this game is still, in spite of my misgivings, I am still, going back and doing some of them built-in speed runs, just to see if I can get that time really down. So,
Nice.
so yeah, I still really am enjoying it, and I think it's definitely worth it.
Last question I got for you, and actually I have two more. My first question is this up there with Chasm? And my second question is, what is your rating?
It is up there, but Chasm holds a special place in my heart, so it's not going to dethrone my favorite. Rating-wise, we're doing whole numbers, so 5 out of 5. But if I was doing partial numbers, I'd say 4.7 out of 5 for me. Because it's just little things holding it back, but, not so far away from 5 out of 5 that it's not a rounding error,
So for me, I would say this one is a 4 out of 5. Like, for me, it's really hard to give a game a 5 out of 5, period.
Mm-hmm.
And as I would say, as much as I like the idea of having, I don't want to say imprecise, but having grappling controls, I prefer games that allow me to just jump where I need to go. You've got to retrain your brain.
Mm-hmm.
I think about Rusted Moss, which is a game that I reviewed solo last year. It had grappling mechanics as well. And it's just not, to me, the most efficient or fun way to play a game, but they did it well. So I can't fault them too much for that. The positives are all the things I've already said. 4 out of 5 from me. That has been our Indie Game of the Week.
All right. Well, now we turn to a crowdfunding project that's trying to get off of the ground. We call this Kick or Kickstart. This will be a quick one here because, this is called The Last Colossus, The Quest for Redemption. Short version here, we're talking a tight third-person perspective action RPG with 2 different characters, both a fighter and a spellcaster. You've got this kind of maybe post-apocalyptic setting where you do have the option of, like, one of the characters has basically like a sniper rifle at some point in time, but also some old-style melee weapons. It definitely has the sort of Shadow of the Colossus kind of vibes where you've got big colossi that are a big part of the setting, and a lot of almost superhero style things. The spellcaster has some sequences in here where he is flying around and also, has some on occasion sort of airbender type vibes to the things that he's doing. Now this game is from a studio out of France. $17 is the early bird, which is available for a little while yet, and then it goes up to $22 because that's 15 and 20 euros respectively. Once they get past that early bird thing, they're looking for $21,000 to fund the project, with delivery supposed to be in July of next year. And while I can't tell you too much about this, aside from what we see here on the page, the vibe is something that I like. It evokes a bit of wonder, even though it is a little less wide open fields of something like Shadow of the Colossus. It definitely has a sense of scale and scope that I appreciate. So anyway, Mr. Nice Guy, any thoughts here?
Yeah, so the first thing I noticed, and I had not seen this until now, is this gives off vibes of many other popular games. Mm-hmm. I can see Witcher 3 influence. I can see Horizon Forbidden West or Zero Dawn influence. I can see Prince of Persia influence. And then, of course, I can see some Shadow of the Colossus influence. The thing that turns me off to this immediately is that as I'm watching the video, it seems like the video glitches in a couple places. And I went back and played it again just to make sure it wasn't that I'm streaming and I'm talking and recording. It's not my computer. The video legitimately glitches that they have for the preview. And to me, that's unacceptable. for a presentation of the product that you're trying to get, many strangers to kickstart. So I have some skepticism about that. The game itself looks like it's fun. It looks smooth. I just finished watching the 2-minute trailer as you were talking, and I'm not seeing really a lot of combat in the trailer, which to me is troubling as well, because I think that this game is going to be combat heavy. Maybe there's a stealth option. Third thing I'll say, there's some in-game graphics that look like they are good. They look solid. But then at the end, it kind of like zooms in on the character's face, and the graphics are so much better than what we saw previously. And so I guess I'm just confused about having different levels of graphical fidelity in your gameplay trailer. I don't want to be overly critical, but these are things that I notice as someone who reviews these. So looks like a cool concept. I like the influences, but I see some problems off the bat.
No, same here. I think the biggest thing, you've heard me say it a million times, and I'll say it a million more, playable demo. It's one thing to put together a presentation that highlights what you're going for, but especially if something is ready to be delivered July of next year. And they do have several videos farther in the campaign that you scroll down, and they're titled Demo, The Last Colossus. But none of these happen to be, it's not forward of saying, oh, well, we have a demo. It's just their demo of it. And that, I think, for any type of game that you think you can turn around in just a hair over a year, especially for something that has as many moving parts as a game like this is, presenting to us, you should really be far enough along to have a demo available to us. Another thing that's a little bit of a concern for me is at the end, it says that it will be releasing, it'll be releasing first on the PC and a couple of months later on other consoles. And so it says, you just tell us which one at the end of this project you want to get your thing, what preferred console. But I know that all of these consoles don't exactly play alike. They are not programmed quite the same. And they have various requirements in their, in their certification process that requires more time and more money, in some cases, specific fees that don't seem to be baked into what's going on here. So anyway, it's, just some concerns when people are saying, give us money to make a thing. I need more confidence to help you make a thing. So I
agree.
I love the idea. I love the vibes. I absolutely would love something just like this. But I've got to say, kick it, because I can't see it in action. I can just see what you're saying about it, and I try not to believe the hype.
I'm not even on the fence about this. This is a kick for me. Wish him the best, and I've explained my reasons why. That's
Absolutely. It. The best to you, but sorry, bring us a demo. And that's been Kick or Kickstart.
Nice. Now it is time for Nerd Flex.
Woohoo.
A segment where you, the viewers, try to stump the hosts. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. We're going to dive right into the test bank today. And we'll pull up a random question and see what happens. So, question number 1, spin the wheel. It's a Capcom question. Mac, what is Arthur's default weapon in Ghosts and Goblins?
That would be a lance. Or I guess you could maybe call it a spear, but I'm pretty sure that the video game manual calls it a lance.
Yeah, because he definitely throws it, which to me is a spear, but it's like he's a medieval character. And so I believe that lance is probably the answer we're looking for. Ghosts and Goblins, solid game, by the way, if you've never played it. So let's see what the answer is. I think we're on the same page here.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
So this is a technicality. I think that we're going to count this one. It's a spear.
Yeah. We said lance. We both acknowledged lance and spear, but guaranteed it's called a lance in the game manual.
Yeah. So Mac, I'm not sure if we've done this one before, but here's the next question that comes up. It's a Nintendo question. Miyamoto once said, video games are bad for you. They said the same about what? I think we may have done this one before. Do you think we have?
I don't think so. I don't know as I've ever heard this before, but I'm curious. Let's see. Video games are bad for you. They said the same about, I feel like movies or maybe books.
I actually think it's rock and roll.
Oh, that would make so much sense.
I don't. Maybe we haven't done this before because you have a photographic memory.
That's hardly the truth, but but thank you.
I'm pretty sure I've read this somewhere that Miyamoto said the same thing about rock and roll.
Oh, well,
or rock music.
I believe you. You should say rock music. Me though, I'll stick with movies just because I haven't heard it and it's not multiple choice.
Okay, final answers. Let's see what it is. Yeah, I was right, dude. It's rock and roll.
Yes, of course you were right, Mr. Nice Guy. Oh, that is so awesome. That makes me love him just all the more.
Miyamoto is the man. Alex, man, thank you for the raid. Someone said asbestos in the chat.
They said the same thing about asbestos.
They did say the same thing about asbestos. That is true. Don't eat paint chips.
Of course, that's lead.
Okay, so question number 3. It's a Sonic question. What picture is displayed on the item box that contains a bubble shield in Sonic 3? What picture is displayed on the item box that contains a bubble shield in Sonic 3?
I feel like it's like a water bubble.
Yeah, I'm thinking like 2 or 3 bubbles. Like I feel like this is an easy question.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
All right, easy questions today. Final answer. Let's see if we're right. It's a water drop.
A water drop. Yeah, water bubble, water drop. Yeah.
Water drop, water bubble. Matt got that one right. Simple enough questions this week. We'll keep it moving. That's been Nerdflex.
All right. Well, we shall keep it moving to a little bit of legalese.
Legalese.
So this is a short one as well because we don't have that much to go on yet. But this is Noel v. Roblox. And this relates to essentially... some unfair business practices, we'll call it, in the legal terminology. But for us normal folk, we might call it, conversion, some theft, perhaps, and a dash of child labor. So, inside of this lawsuit, right, Noel... And they're trying to get a class action started. We're talking about the things that Roblox has done wherein they have dealt unjustly with the customer. They cite a whole bunch of different things, including things like Roblox knows who is playing their games. They know what's going on, and they actively encourage children to make content for their game. Of course, slightly in quotes. Now, we know that Roblox itself bills itself as a content platform, as a creation platform, and even runs ads talking about how you can build your things in Roblox, have people pay for that, and get a payday out of it. And they argue that that's kind of pretty close to some child labor there, getting lots of minors to create the content for your game.
Who is arguing this?
Raymond Noel and Laura Noel on behalf of themselves and all others who are similarly situated. So,
okay.
So that's their argument here. Now, of course, they also throw some other things here that it's interesting how, of course, this payday that you target to their argument is target toward children is only going to be in company script, aka the Robux. And an interesting little thing that they cite here, which is definitely interesting if true, is that the conversion rate for Robux is a little interesting, where it costs $1,000 for 100,000 Robux. If you're trying to convert the Robux out from being paid for the purchases, then 100,000 Robux is going to come out to you at $350, where it's, the rest of that is being chomped up by Roblox themselves. And they're saying that that as well is unconscionable. And it's really this sort of hinging on a lot of, Roblox knows that minors are making the content for the video games. However, they are specifically dealing in a way that is unfair and unjust with the minors that they are specifically targeting to make the content of their games. And that's really the broad brush stroke of the arguments in Noel v. Roblox. Now, all we have so far is their initial complaint. And I have to admit, I read a lot of these. I was not especially impressed by the arguments made in this, and I don't know if it's going to go much of anywhere. However, it has started to get picked up and, made mention, so I figured it was worthwhile us just doing a quick thing here. As we know, Mr. Nice Guy, you've signed that end-user license agreement and give up an awful lot in order to play video games or to participate. And unless something like the way we treat end-user user agreements changes, I don't think even something like this winds up being taken seriously for more than a day or two in court. But hey, what do I know?
Well, I do know that generally speaking, contracts with minors not necessarily legit. But I feel like they would have covered their bases and somehow looked into that, right? So,
yep.
Cool. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in to episode 298 of Two Nerds in a Pod. Before we go, we have one last segment called What We've Been Watching and What We've Been Playing, where we talk about just that. The cool nerdy stuff we've been into on Netflix, on Hulu, all across the board, and the games we've been playing on all platforms as well. If you're here live, you have a job to do. Let us know what you've been watching and playing, because we're always looking for cool nerdy stuff to get into. Mac, what you been watching and playing?
Well, I have been watching some things on Dropout, so I've been watching some new episodes of Game Changer and Make Some Noise, fun little improv games that they've got on there. Also, I have been I have been playing some fun games like Sanabi, as well as some others. But mostly, I'm most excited about the weekend. I had people over and we played Dungeons & Dragons in person in my living room. 7 people total for that, and it was delightful. The first time I've had a big group in person in a long time, and real fun. But as for what I'm looking forward to watching, I was gonna give Netflix's Last Airbender a go, the new one. So don't spoil it yet for me. I'm still thinking about it. What about you, Mr. Nice Guy?
Speaking of in-person games, I did mention my brother was in town, and we did play this game. You've probably heard of it, called The Great Down Moody. Now, I have never played it before, at least I don't remember, and so we got into it, all the kids, my wife and I, around the table, and we had a blast, so that was super fun. Now, in terms of the retro games that I mentioned picking up,
yes,
did pick up a couple games for the Analog Pocket. Now, Mac, #baller on a budget. I only buy games if they're a good deal. I'm looking at price charting when I go to these stores to see if the price is good. Was able to pick up Lucky Luke for the Game Boy Color, which is just a solid, run and gun platformer. It's not necessarily brilliant, but it's a great, I have a few minutes, I can hop in and play it and put my Analog Pocket to sleep. And the other game I picked up is one of the better games on the Game Boy, which is Final Fantasy Adventure. Yes. It has it has Link's Awakening vibes, but has RPG elements. And as I've been researching best games on the Game Boy, hidden gems, not that it's a hidden gem, but that was one of the ones that came up, and it was on sale for like $13 cheaper than it's supposed to be on price charting. So I picked that bad boy up, and that's pretty much what I've been watching and playing. Mac, we got a few people in the chat. They're a little quiet today, but what do we got?
Sure, I see from Galvatrons shared his watching and playing, Shogun, Halo Season 2, The Marvels, and Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom for his watching, and for playing the new Prince of Persia game, Lost Crown. I've been wanting to get into that. Pikmin 4, Super Mario RPG, Final Fantasy VII Intergrade, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, and Axiom Verge 2. All sound like good title.
Yeah, somehow that reminded me. I started watching Marvel What If Season 2, and that was fantastic.
Nice.
Well, Mac, why don't you take us home, my friend?
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody, for coming out and being a part of the show. Episode 298 comes to a close, but we couldn't have done it without you. Be sure to tune in next time, twitch.tv/2nerds in a pod. That's with the number 2, of course, at 7 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Central on Tuesdays. Join us for the next show. Give us your sweet, awesome, nerdy content. Let us know what you think about these things. And above all, try and stump us with that nerdy trivia. But until then, be excellent to each other and keep it nerdy. See ya.
Deuces, y'all.